The wind howled like a wounded beast through the Colorado peaks, driving snow horizontal across the barren landscape. Mara Bellamy hung limp against the gnarled pine iron shackles, cutting deep into her wrists as blood froze in crimson streaks down her arms. 8 months pregnant, her belly strained against the tattered remnants of what had once been a blue calico dress. Her breath came in shallow puffs of white vapor, each exhalation potentially her last. "Please," she whispered to the merciless sky, though her voice was lost in the storm's fury. "Not my baby. Take me, but not my baby." The child within her had been still for hours, and that silence terrified her more than the approaching death. She wanted to scream, to rage against the fate that had chained her to this tree like a sacrificial offering. But her throat was raw and dry, producing only a weak rasp. Through the swirling white curtain of snow, a shadow moved. Mara's eyes, swollen nearly shut from the cold, strained to focus. Was it another hallucination? Her mind had conjured Marcus twice already. Her husband, who had sold her like livestock to pay his gambling debts, his face twisted with shame and greed as he counted Josiah Hawkins's silver coins. But this shadow was different, broader, moving with purpose through the drifts. Fear and hope warred in her chest as the figure approached. Was this her salvation, or simply another predator come to claim what remained of her broken body? The man for it was definitely a man, stopped just beyond her vision, studying her with eyes she could not see. For an eternity that lasted perhaps 30 seconds, neither moved. Then she heard the metallic scrape of steel against iron, and the blessed relief as the shackles fell away from her wrists. Strong arms lifted her from the snow, and she felt herself pressed against a warm chest covered in fur and leather. The scent of sage and wood smoke filled her nostrils, so different from Hawkins's whiskey stench and the acrid fear sweat of his men. As consciousness faded, her last coherent thought was a prayer that this stranger, whoever he was, would not hurt her child. Warmth crept into Mara's awareness, like a gentle tide starting with her fingertips and slowly spreading through her frost-numbed limbs. The crackling of burning wood reached her ears before she opened her eyes, accompanied by the soft whisper of wind outside what sounded like a cave. The bitter scent of sage filled the air, mixed with something medicinal she couldn't identify. When she finally forced her eyes open, the first thing she saw was firelight dancing across rough stone walls, adorned with ancient paintings, spirals, and handprints left by people long vanished. A man sat cross-legged beside the fire, his back to her long black hair hanging loose to his shoulders. Even in profile, she could see the weathered bronze of his skin and the strong line of his jaw. He was native Navajo, she guessed from his clothing and the turquoise ornaments woven into his hair. "You're awake." His voice was deep and quiet, accented with the musical cadence of his people's language. He didn't turn to look at her, instead reaching for a clay pot near the fire. "Drink this. It will help with the pain." Steam rose from the vessel as he handed it to her, and she caught the earthy aroma of willow bark and other herbs she couldn't name. Mara's hands shook as she accepted the cup, partly from weakness and partly from fear. "Who are you?" She managed her voice, a hoarse whisper. "Why did you help me?" She studied his face in the firelight, noting the parallel scars that ran from his left temple to his jaw, old wounds that spoke of violence survived. "My name is Aston Blackhorse," he said simply. "And I helped you because no one deserves to die chained to a tree like an animal." His dark eyes met hers for the first time, and she saw something in their depths that surprised her, a pain that matched her own, though older and more deeply buried. "Your child still lives," he added, gesturing toward her belly. "I can feel the heartbeat." Relief flooded through her so completely that she nearly dropped the cup. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I was so afraid." She took a sip of the bitter tea, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. "How long have I been here?" 2 days. The storm has been fierce, but it's breaking now. Aston fed another piece of wood to the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. You spoke in your sleep, called for your father, cursed someone named Marcus. He glanced at her bandaged wrists. The man who chained you, what was his name? Josiah Hawkins. She said the name, tasting like poison in her mouth. He owns women, buys and sells us like cattle. Marcus owed him money, so he gave him me. She pulled the fur blanket tighter around her shoulders, suddenly cold despite the fire's warmth. How did you find me? Aston was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. I was hunting when I heard the voices. Hawkins and his men arguing about whether to leave you or come back for your body. They mentioned something about you being more valuable alive, about someone willing to pay extra for. He gestured toward her pregnancy. Mara felt sick. She had tried not to think about why Hawkins wanted her alive, but the horrible possibilities had haunted her dreams. He said there were men who would pay well for a woman carrying a child. Said they didn't care whose child it was, as long as it was healthy. She pressed her hands to her belly protectively. I won't let them have my baby. They won't, Aston said with quiet certainty. The storm covered your trail, and I know these mountains better than any white man. But they'll come looking when the weather clears. We need to move soon. He studied her face in the firelight. Can you travel? Mara tested her strength, sitting up straighter and flexing her hands. The frostbite damage was painful but not severe thanks to Aston's quick action and the healing salves he'd applied. I think so. But where can we go? Hawkins has men everywhere, and I... She hesitated, then decided honesty was her only option. I have nowhere to go. No family, no money, nothing. There's a place, Aston said slowly. Deep in the high country, where my people used to gather for ceremonies. It's hidden, protected. We can wait there until your child is born, then decide what comes next. He met her eyes again. But you should know, I'm not welcome among my own people anymore. Traveling with me may bring different dangers. Before Mara could ask what he meant, the sound of barking dogs echoed faintly from outside the cave. Both of them froze, listening as the sound grew closer. Aston was on his feet, instantly moving with silent grace to peer out through a narrow gap in the rocks. They found us, he said grimly, already gathering their few supplies. 3 men and 2 dogs, maybe half a mile down the slope. He pressed a knife into Mara's hand. Stay behind me, and if something happens to me, you run. Follow the stream uphill until you reach the standing stones, then head east to the big valley. There are caves there where you can hide. The barking grew louder, accompanied now by the shouts of men and the crunch of boots in snow. Aston doused the fire with handfuls of snow, plunging the cave into darkness. Can you move quietly? He whispered, helping Mara to her feet. Her legs shook, but she managed to stand and follow him toward the back of the cave, where a narrow passage led deeper into the mountain. There she is. The voice was unmistakably that of Cleet Dawson, Hawkins' most brutal enforcer. Dogs picked up her scent by the tree, tracked it right here. Boss is gonna be real pleased when we bring back his property. Property. Mara whispered, fury giving strength to her weakened limbs. I'm nobody's property. She gripped the knife Aston had given her, its weight solid and reassuring in her palm. Whatever happened, she would not go back to chains willingly. The passage led to another cave, this one smaller, and with an opening that looked out over a steep ravine. Aston studied the drop with calculating eyes. 20 feet to the water, he murmured. Current strong from the snow melt, but it leads away from them. Can you swim? Not well, Mara admitted, looking at the rushing water far below. and not in my condition. The idea of jumping terrified her, but the approaching voices terrified her more. She could hear them clearly now, Dawson's harsh laughter mixing with the eager whining of the tracking dogs. Found the cave. Another voice, younger and full of cruel excitement. Still warm ashes in here, can't be far. Tommy Morrison, she recognized, barely 18, but already marked by the violence of Hawkins's trade. Want me to loose the dogs, Dawson? Not yet, boy. Let's see if we can flush 'em out first. Hey, pregnant lady? Dawson's voice echoed through the caves, bouncing off stone walls. Come on out, nice and easy, Boss Hawkins just wants to talk. Ain't nobody gonna hurt you, none. Aston's jaw tightened at the obvious lie. He'd seen enough of men like Hawkins and Dawson to know exactly what they did to the women they captured. There's another way, he said quietly, pointing to a ledge that ran along the cave wall about 10 feet up. It leads to a series of tunnels that come out near the spring. But it's narrow, and with your condition, I can do it, Mara said with more confidence than she felt. I have to do it. She placed a protective hand over her belly, feeling the child move restlessly inside her. My baby deserves a chance at freedom. Aston boosted her up onto the ledge, then followed with their small bundle of supplies. The passage was indeed narrow, forcing them to move in single file with their backs pressed against the rock wall. Below them, they could hear the men entering the cave, Dawson cursing at the cold ashes and the lack of obvious tracks. They went deeper. Pike Kellerman's voice drifted up high-pitched with nervousness. Has to be another way out of here. Damn Indians always got bolt holes. Pike had lost 2 fingers to frostbite the previous winter and was known for his nervous disposition, but he was also one of Hawkins' best trackers. The ledge seemed to go on forever, winding through passages that had been carved by water over countless centuries. Mara's legs burned with effort, and more than once she had to stop to catch her breath. Each time Aston waited patiently, his dark eyes scanning ahead for danger. Finally, they reached a chamber where pale light filtered down from above. Natural chimney, Aston explained, pointing to the shaft that led to the surface. We can climb out here, but we'll be exposed on the ridge for a few hundred yards. Once we reach the tree line, we'll have cover. He studied her face with concern. How are you holding up? I'm tired, but I can make it. Mara said, though, privately, she wondered how much farther her body could carry her. The baby seemed to be pressing against her ribs, making each breath an effort. Where exactly are we going? Medicine Wheel Canyon, Aston replied, already starting up the rocky chimney. Sacred ground to my people, so most whites avoid it. There's fresh water, game, and shelter. We can rest there safely. He paused in his climbing. But I should warn you, the place holds difficult memories for me. My sister died there during the troubles with the cavalry. Mara wanted to ask more, but the sound of barking dogs echoed up from the caves below. Dawson had decided to loose the hounds after all, and it was only a matter of time before they found the ledge trail. Tell me later, she said, beginning her own climb. Right now, let's just focus on staying alive. The ridge was a nightmare of wind and exposed rock with snow swirling so thick they could barely see 10 feet ahead. Mara stumbled repeatedly, her swollen body fighting every step, but Aston's strong hand on her arm kept her upright and moving. Behind them, the baying of hounds grew fainter as the storm worked in their favor, covering their scent and tracks. There, Aston pointed ahead to where a line of stunted pines marked the beginning of the forest. Once we reach the trees, the worst is over. They half ran, half slid down the slope, reaching the shelter of the pines, just as Mara's strength gave out completely. She collapsed against a tree trunk, gasping for air that seemed too thin to fill her lungs. "I can't," she panted, pressing both hands to her sides, where sharp pains shot through her ribs. "The baby. Something's wrong. It's too early, but I think—" She looked down in horror at the wetness spreading down her legs. "No. No, not here, not now." Aston knelt beside her, his face grim but calm. "How long since you felt the first pain?" he asked, already scanning the area for shelter. "And don't say it's too early. Babies come when they're ready, not when we think they should." "Since we started climbing." Mara admitted another contraction, doubling her over. "I thought it was just the exertion, but—" She gripped his arm desperately. "I can't have my baby out here in the snow. Please, there has to be somewhere." "There is," Aston said, lifting her as carefully as he could. "Medicine Wheel Canyon is only another mile. There's a birth cave there used by my people for generations. It's warm, protected, and—" He hesitated. "And sacred. Your child will be born under the protection of the ancient spirits." The mile to the canyon was the longest of Mara's life. Aston carried her when the contractions were too strong for her to walk, set her down to rest when his own strength needed renewing. The snow had stopped, but the temperature was dropping as evening approached, and their breath formed white clouds in the crystalline air. "Tell me about your sister," Mara said during one rest stop, hoping to distract herself from the pain. "What happened to her?" She could see the grief that crossed Aston's face, but also something else, guilt she thought deep and unrelenting. Ayana was her name. It means eternal blossom in our language. Aston stared off toward the distant peaks, his voice thick with memory. She was 16, beautiful, full of laughter. When the cavalry came to move our people to the reservation, she hid in Medicine Wheel Canyon. I was supposed to protect her, but He stopped, shaking his head. "I failed her. I wasn't there when they found her." What happened?" Mara asked gently, seeing how the words cost him. Another contraction gripped her stronger than before, and she had to breathe through it before she could speak again. "How did she die?" "Captain Morrison, Tommy's father, he was leading the patrol. When they found Ayana, she fought them, tried to run. Morrison shot her in the back as she reached the sacred spring." Aston's hands clenched into fists. Said later she was resisting arrest, that it was necessary. But I know the truth. I saw what they did to her before she died. Mara felt sick, understanding now why Aston had recognized young Tommy Morrison's voice in the cave. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No wonder you left your people. The pain of staying in a place with so many terrible memories." "I didn't leave by choice," Aston said bitterly. "The tribal council blamed me for Ayana's death. Said if I had been a proper brother, a proper warrior, she would never have been alone when the soldiers came. They banished me, stripped me of my name and my place in the tribe." He looked at her with eyes full of old pain. "I've been walking alone ever since." Another contraction, stronger and longer than the others, made Mara cry out involuntarily. When it passed, she found herself looking at Aston with new understanding. "You saved me because you couldn't save her," she said softly. "You're trying to make amends." "Maybe," Aston admitted. "Or maybe I just couldn't stand to see another innocent person suffer for the greed and cruelty of men like Hawkins." He helped her to her feet as the canyon entrance came into view, a narrow cleft between towering walls of red stone. "Either way, I'm glad I found you in time." Medicine Wheel Canyon was unlike anything Mara had ever seen. The walls rose several hundred feet on either side, carved into fantastic shapes by centuries of wind and water. Ancient pictographs covered the lower sections, spirals, animals, and human figures that seemed to dance in the flickering light of Aston's small fire. At the heart of the canyon, a spring bubbled up from the earth, forming a pool so clear she could see every pebble on the bottom. The birth cave is just ahead, Aston said, supporting her as another contraction nearly dropped her to her knees. My grandmother helped deliver babies there for 40 years. She always said the spirits guided her hands, helped her save both mothers and children when the birth was difficult. The cave was smaller than their previous shelter, but warmer, with walls that curved inward like cupped hands. Someone, perhaps Aston's grandmother, had carved shallow depressions in the stone to hold water and supplies. A natural ledge provided a place for a birthing woman to brace herself, and the floor was covered with clean sand that had blown in over the years. I need you to tell me what to do, Mara said, fear making her voice shake. I don't know anything about having babies. My mother died when I was small, and I never... Another contraction cut off her words, this one so strong it brought tears to her eyes. My grandmother taught me, Aston said, already building a fire and heating water in a metal pot he'd produced from their supplies. She said every member of the tribe should know how to help bring new life into the world, because you never know when you might be the only one available. He knelt beside her, his presence calm and reassuring. The baby is coming soon. I can tell by the way you're breathing. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of pain, effort, and ancient wisdom. Aston guided her through each stage with the confidence of someone who had assisted at many births, his hands gentle but sure, as he helped position her and monitored the baby's progress. He spoke constantly, sometimes in English and sometimes in his native tongue, telling her stories about the sacred canyon and the children who had been born there over the centuries. There was a woman named Desba, who gave birth here during the worst blizzard anyone could remember. He said during one brief respite between contractions. The snow was so deep that her husband couldn't reach her for 3 days, but she and the baby survived on melted snow and the sacred berries that grow near the spring. Her daughter grew up to be a great healer. What happened to your grandmother? Mara asked, needing the distraction as pressure built again, deep in her belly. Is she still alive? She could feel the baby moving lower, getting ready for its final journey into the world. She died the winter before Ayana, Aston said quietly. The influenza that swept through the territory took many of the elders. But she taught me well before she passed. Said someday I would need the knowledge to help someone important. He met Mara's eyes. I think she meant you. Just then, a new kind of pain gripped Mara, not a contraction, but the overwhelming urge to push. Something's happening, she gasped, feeling her body take control of the process. I think the baby's coming now. Yes, Aston confirmed, moving to catch the emerging child. I can see the head. One more push and your baby will be here. His voice was filled with wonder and reverence, as if he were witnessing a miracle which Mara supposed he was. With a final surge of effort that seemed to tear through her very soul, Mara felt the baby slip free of her body. For a terrifying moment, there was silence in the cave, except for her own ragged breathing. Then a thin, angry wail filled the air. And Aston was laughing, holding up a tiny, perfect little girl. She's beautiful, he said, wrapping the baby in a soft deer-hide blanket he'd prepared. Small, but strong, with a voice that could wake the ancestors. He placed the infant in Mara's arms, and she felt her heart expand to encompass a love so vast it threatened to overwhelm her. A hello, little one, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks as she studied the tiny face. I'm your mama, and I promise you'll grow up free. No one will ever own you, ever hurt you the way they hurt me. The baby's eyes opened briefly, dark blue and unfocused, but somehow knowing. What will you name her? Aston asked, tending to the afterbirth. with practiced efficiency. In my tradition, the name should reflect the circumstances of the birth and the hopes for the child's future. Mara considered this as she nursed her daughter for the first time, marveling at how naturally the baby took to it. "Hope," she said finally. "Her name is Hope, because she was born in the darkest time of my life, but she represents everything good that might still be possible." She looked up at Aston with gratitude that words couldn't express. "And her middle name will be Ayana, if that's all right with you. In honor of your sister and the strength of women who refuse to give up." Aston's eyes filled with tears, the first emotion other than grief that Mara had seen him show. "Ayana would have liked that," he said softly. "She always said that the spirits of women who died fighting for their freedom would guide and protect the daughters who came after them." For 3 peaceful days, they remained in the birth cave, while Mara recovered and hope grew stronger. Aston proved to be surprisingly skilled at caring for a newborn, fashioning a cradle from bent willow branches and soft furs, hunting fresh game to keep Mara's strength up, and even singing ancient Navajo lullabies that seemed to calm the baby when she fussed. It was the closest thing to a normal family life that Mara had ever experienced. "You'd make a good father," she told him one evening as they sat by the fire, Hope sleeping peacefully between them. "Have you ever thought about having children of your own?" It was perhaps too personal a question, but their shared ordeal had created an intimacy that made such inquiries feel natural. "There was a woman once," Aston admitted, his voice soft with memory. "Before Ayana died before my exile. Her name was Shalissa, and we were to be married when the spring came. But after the council's judgment, her family forbade the match. Said I was cursed, that any children I fathered would carry the shame of my failure." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. "I haven't allowed myself to think about family since then. The council was wrong," Mara said firmly. "What happened to Ayana wasn't your fault. You can't be everywhere at once, protect everyone you love from every possible danger. Sometimes terrible things just happen, and blame belongs only to those who choose to do evil." She reached across the fire to touch his hand. "You saved hope in me. That should count for something." "Does it?" Aston asked, turning his hand to clasp hers. "Some days I wonder if I'm not just prolonging the inevitable. Hawkins won't give up easily, and there are limits to how far we can run with a newborn baby." His expression was troubled as he looked down at Hope's sleeping face. "Maybe I should have left you in Denver, found you proper help instead of dragging you into the wilderness. And let Hawkins find me in some boarding house or charity ward." Mara shook her head. "No, Aston. Whatever happens, Hope was born free because of you. That's worth everything." She hesitated, then forged ahead with the question that had been troubling her. "But you're right that we can't stay here forever. What happens next?" Before Aston could answer, the sound of hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. Both of them froze, listening as the noise grew closer. There were multiple horses moving at a steady pace that suggested their riders knew exactly where they were going. Aston was already reaching for his rifle when a familiar voice called out from the canyon entrance. "Oh, Blackhorse, I know you're in there." Josiah Hawkins himself, his voice carrying the confident authority of a man accustomed to getting his way. "And I know you've got my property with you. Let's discuss this like civilized men, shall we?" Mara felt her blood turn to ice. Somehow, impossibly, Hawkins had tracked them to this sacred place. She gathered Hope protectively against her chest, the baby stirring and whimpering at the sudden tension in her mother's body. "How did he find us?" she whispered. "Dawson's a better tracker than I gave him credit for," Aston replied grimly, checking his weapons. "Or they forced information out of someone." His jaw tightened with sudden realization. "Old Joseph. He's the only other person who knows about this place, and he's been selling information to whites to feed his whiskey habit. I'm waiting, Blackhorse. Hawkins called again. And I'm not a patient man. Send out the woman and the baby, and maybe I'll let you ride away with your scalp still attached. Keep them, and I'll turn you over to the territorial marshal with a bounty on your head that'll have every gun in Colorado looking for you. Aston moved to the cave entrance, staying in the shadows, but positioning himself where he could see out into the canyon. I count 4 men, he reported quietly. Hawkins, Dawson, the Morrison boy, and someone I don't recognize. They're spread out to cover the exits, but they haven't moved to surround the cave yet. He looked back at Mara with eyes full of grim determination. There's something you should know before this goes any further. What? Mara asked, though part of her already feared the answer. There had been moments during their time together when Aston's knowledge of Hawkins and his men had seemed too detailed, too personal. I used to work for him. Aston said, the words falling like stones into the silence. After my exile, when I had nowhere else to go and no way to survive, Hawkins offered me work as a tracker and guide. I told myself I was only helping to catch criminals and army deserters, not... He gestured helplessly, not hunting women and children like animals. Mara stared at him in shock, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. You worked for the man who's been hunting me, who bought me from my husband like a piece of livestock. The betrayal cut deeper than she would have expected given how short their acquaintance had been. I quit when I learned what he really was, Aston said urgently. When I saw what happened to the women, he captured what he sold them into. That's why I was in the area when I found you. I've been trying to gather evidence document his crimes so the territorial authorities would finally act against him. And how do I know this isn't all part of some elaborate plan? Mara demanded, her voice rising despite the danger. How do I know you didn't lead him right to me, that this whole rescue wasn't just another way to make me trust you so I'd come quietly? Hope began to cry, picking up on her mother's distress. Because if that were true, I would have turned you over days ago instead of helping you give birth to your daughter. Aston replied, his own voice strained. Because I wouldn't have told you about Ayanna, about my exile, about things that shame me too much to share with anyone else. He moved away from the cave entrance to kneel beside her. I know you have no reason to trust me after what I've just told you, but please, time's up, Blackhorse. Hawkins' voice boomed across the canyon. I'm sending Dawson in to collect what's mine. Resist and things will go badly for everyone. Mara looked into Aston's eyes and saw her own desperate situation reflected there. Whatever his past connection to Hawkins, he had risked everything to help her and Hope. That had to count for something. All right, she said quietly. I choose to trust you. But if you betray us, I won't, Aston promised. Whatever happens, I won't let Hawkins take you or Hope. I swear it on Ayanna's memory. He moved back to the cave entrance as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed off the stone walls. Stay back, keep Hope quiet, and be ready to run if I tell you to. Cleet Dawson appeared at the cave mouth, his scarred face twisted in a predatory grin. Well, well, the great Aston Blackhorse hiding in a hole like a prairie dog. He held a rifle loosely in his hands, not quite aimed, but ready to be raised quickly. Boss wants his property back, Indian. No need for anyone to get hurt over this. The woman and child are under my protection. Aston replied calmly, though Mara could see the tension in his shoulders. They're not going anywhere with you or Hawkins. His own rifle was positioned so he could bring it to bear in an instant. Protection. Dawson laughed harshly. From what I hear, you couldn't protect your own sister from a cavalry patrol. What makes you think you can do better with these two? The cruel words hit their mark, and Mara saw Aston flinch despite his best efforts to remain composed. "Then that's enough," Mara said, surprising both men by stepping into view. Hope was quiet in her arms, wide eyes taking in the tense scene with an infant's unconcerned curiosity. "I can speak for myself, thank you very much." She looked directly at Dawson, letting him see the steel in her voice. "I'm not Hawkins' property, and neither is my daughter. We're not going anywhere with you." Dawson's grin widened, showing yellowed teeth. "Feisty little thing, ain't you, boss? Always did like them with some spirit to break." His eyes lingered on Hope with an expression that made Mara's skin crawl. "Pretty baby, too. Gonna be worth a lot of money to the right buyer. Over my dead body." Mara snarled, surprising herself with the vehemence of her response. The maternal instinct that had awakened during Hope's birth blazed like a furnace in her chest, burning away fear and leaving only fierce protectiveness. "That can be arranged?" Dawson said, raising his rifle slightly. "Boss said to bring you back alive if possible, but accidents happen, especially to women who don't know their place." His finger moved toward the trigger. Aston's shot took Dawson in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle clattering across the cave floor. The man screamed in pain and rage, clutching his wounded arm as blood seeped through his fingers. "You son of a bitch, I'll kill you for that. Get out," Aston said quietly, already reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Tell Hawkins that if he wants the woman and child, he'll have to come through me to get them. And remind him what happened to the last men who tried." Dawson stumbled back toward the canyon entrance, cursing and threatening revenge with every step. Within minutes, they could hear him reporting to Hawkins, his voice high with pain and fury. The response was a string of profanity that echoed off the canyon walls, followed by the sound of heated discussion among the four men. "That bought us some time," Aston said, moving to barricade the cave entrance with loose rocks. "But not much. Hawkins will try a different approach, now probably smoke us out or wait for us to run out of water." He looked at their meager supplies with a calculating expression. "We have maybe 2 days of food and water less if Hope gets sick and needs extra attention. There has to be another way out of this canyon," Mara said, pacing nervously as Hope dozed in her arms. "Your people used this place for ceremonies. Surely they had escape routes in case of attack." She could feel panic starting to build despite her best efforts to stay calm. "There are 3 ways out," Aston confirmed. The main entrance, where Hawkins is waiting, a narrow chimney that leads to the mesa top, and an underwater passage that connects to the river system. But the chimney is too exposed, they'd pick us off before we got halfway up. "And the water passage?" He shook his head. "It's dangerous under normal circumstances, impossible with a newborn baby. Then we're trapped," Mara said, sinking down onto the sandy floor as the full weight of their situation hit her. "All we've done is delay the inevitable." She looked down at Hope's peaceful face and felt tears start to fall. "I'm sorry, baby girl. Mama tried to keep you safe, but it wasn't enough. Don't give up yet," Aston said firmly. "My grandmother always said that the spirits of this place protect those who are pure of heart. And there's something else, something I haven't told you about Hawkins that might give us an advantage." He knelt beside her, his expression troubled but determined. "He's not just after you for the money you'd bring him. There's a personal reason, something that makes you more valuable to him than any other woman he's captured." "What are you talking about?" Mara asked, though a cold dread was beginning to form in her stomach. "I never met Hawkins before Marcus sold me to him. I'm nobody special, just a preacher's daughter from a poor farming family." "Your mother," Aston said slowly. "What was her maiden name? Where was she from before she married your father?" His dark eyes searched her face as if looking for some confirmation of a suspicion he'd been harboring. "Catherine Montgomery." Mara replied, confusion clear in her voice. "She was from back east somewhere, Pennsylvania, I think. She died when I was 7, so I don't remember much about her family." A terrible possibility began to dawn on her. "Why, what does my mother have to do with Hawkins?" Before Aston could answer, Hawkins' voice boomed across the canyon again, closer this time. "Blackhorse, I know you can hear me. Let me tell you a little story about the woman you're protecting." There was something different in his tone now, a personal venom that went beyond mere business frustration. 20 years ago, there was a gold mine up in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Hawkins continued his words, echoing off the stone walls. "Small operation, but rich ore. Owned by a man named William Montgomery and his daughter Catherine. They lived well off that gold, real well." His laughter was bitter and full of old pain. "Until the mine collapsed and killed every man working in it, including my youngest brother." Mara felt the blood drain from her face as the implications hit her. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." But even as she spoke, memories started flooding back her mother's stories about growing up in the mountains, the mysterious source of income that had kept their family comfortable until Catherine's death. The locked trunk in the attic that her father had never let her open. Catherine Montgomery disappeared after the mine collapse. Hawkins went on relentlessly. "Took all the gold she could carry and vanished into the night. Left my brother's widow and children with nothing, not even enough money to bury him proper." His voice rose with long-suppressed fury. "She changed her name, married some preacher, and lived off stolen gold while my family starved. That's why he wants you alive," Aston said grimly. "He believes you know where the rest of your mother's gold is hidden. That's why he had Marcus sell you instead of just taking you by force. He needed you grateful, dependent, willing to cooperate." His expression was grim as he studied her face. "Do you know anything about this gold?" Mara's mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of childhood memories. The locked trunk, her father's sudden poverty after her mother's death, the way he'd sometimes muttered about Catherine's secrets when he thought she wasn't listening. "There was a trunk," she said slowly, "in our attic. Father said it contained Mother's personal things, but he never let me look inside. After he died and Marcus sold the house." She stopped, realization hitting her like a physical blow. "Marcus has the trunk," she finished. "He must have found it when he was settling Father's estate. If there are documents, maps, anything that would lead to the gold." She looked at Aston with growing horror. "Hawkins doesn't just want me. He wants whatever information Marcus might have, and he's using me as leverage to get it." "Time's up, Mara," Hawkins shouted. "I know you're listening. Your mother was a thief and a murderer, and you're going to pay for her crimes. Come out now, when I might let you live long enough to tell me where she hid the rest of my family's gold." The sound of something heavy being dragged across the canyon floor reached them, followed by the acrid smell of coal oil. "He's going to try to smoke us out," Aston said, moving to check their water supply. "If we soak these blankets, we might be able to breathe through the worst of it, but with hope." He didn't finish the sentence, but Mara understood. A newborn baby wouldn't survive long in a smoke-filled cave. "There has to be something we can do," she said desperately, looking around the cave for inspiration. "Some way to turn this around, make him the one who's trapped instead of us." Her eyes fell on the ancient pictographs covering the walls, and suddenly she remembered something Aston had told her about the sacred canyon. "You said there were spirits here," she said urgently, "that they protected people who were pure of heart. What if we could make Hawkins believe in them too? Scare him enough to make him careless?" It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all they had left. "What do you mean?" Aston asked, though she could see understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. "The echo chamber," he said slowly. "There's a natural acoustic phenomenon deeper in the cave that my people used for ceremonial purposes. Voices sound like they're coming from the spirits themselves." "Exactly." Mara said, her mind racing with possibilities. "And if Hawkins is superstitious enough, if we can make him think the canyon really is haunted." She trailed off as the smell of smoke began to filter into the cave. Whatever they were going to do, they had to do it quickly. Aston was already moving toward the back of the cave, where a narrow passage led deeper into the mountain. "Bring hope," he said. "The echo chamber is back here, and the air will be cleaner. We can work from there." He paused at the entrance to the passage. "But if this doesn't work, it will work," Mara said with more confidence than she felt. "It has to work." She followed him into the darkness, hope clutched protectively against her chest. Behind them, smoke began to fill the birth cave, and they could hear Hawkins shouting orders to his men. The echo chamber was a natural amphitheater carved from living rock with acoustic properties that were truly remarkable. When Aston spoke in a normal voice from the far end, his words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating off the curved walls with an otherworldly quality that raised the hair on Mara's arms. "The spirits are angry." Aston intoned his voice, taking on the cadence of a ceremonial chant. "They call for justice for the innocent blood spilled in this sacred place." His words echoed and re-echoed, building on themselves, until they seemed to come from a multitude of ghostly voices. From outside, they heard one of Hawkins' men. It sounded like young Tommy Morrison gasp in fear. "Did you hear that, boss? Sounded like voices in the rock itself." There was panic in the boy's voice, the terror of someone raised on stories of vengeful spirits and cursed places. "Shut up, Tommy." Hawkins snarled, but even his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "It's just the wind in the rocks or that damned Indian playing tricks." But Mara could hear the doubt beneath his bluster. Men like Hawkins often rose to power through superstition and fear. It was fitting that those same forces might be turned against him. Mara took her turn, letting her voice rise in a wailing cry that the chamber transformed into something truly chilling. "My daughter," she called, thinking of Ayanna and channeling all her own maternal fear into the words. "Where is my daughter who will pay for her blood?" The echoes took her voice and multiplied it, creating a chorus of grief and rage that seemed to fill the entire canyon. "Jesus Christ." That was Pike Kellerman, his voice high with terror. "It's the dead Injun girl, the one Captain Morrison shot. She's come back for revenge." The sound of running feet suggested that Pike had decided he'd had enough of Hawkins' gold to risk facing vengeful spirits. "Get back here, you coward!" Hawkins roared, but his voice cracked on the last word. Mara could hear him arguing with his remaining men, trying to maintain control even as his carefully laid plans began to unravel. "It's just echoes sound bouncing off rocks. There's no such thing as ghosts." But Aston was just getting started. He began to chant in his native language words that Mara didn't understand, but that carried the weight of centuries of tradition and belief. The echo chamber transformed his voice into something primal and terrifying, the sound of ancient powers stirring to life in the sacred stone. "The spirits of all who died by white man's greed call for justice." Mara added her voice, joining with Aston's in a harmony that seemed to make the very walls vibrate. "Blood for blood, life for life, the innocent shall be avenged." Hope began to cry, adding her infant voice to the supernatural chorus. The effect was devastating. Through the smoke now pouring into the back passages, They could hear Tommy Morrison sobbing in terror, begging Hawkins to let them leave before the spirits claimed them all. Even Dawson, tough as he was, sounded shaken as he argued for retreat. "We're getting out of here," Dawson said, his voice carrying clearly through the cave system. "I ain't getting paid enough to fight ghosts and dead Indians. You want that woman so bad, boss, you can come back with an army. I'm done." The sound of horses moving suggested that at least some of Hawkins' men were abandoning him. "On you yellow-bellied cowards!" Hawkins screamed after them. "It's just noise, just tricks and echoes." But his voice was alone now, and Mara could hear the desperation creeping in. Whatever hold he'd had over his men was breaking under the assault of supernatural terror. Aston gestured for silence, and then crept forward to peer through the smoke toward the cave entrance. When he returned, his expression was grim, but hopeful. "Hawkins is alone," he reported quietly. "His men rode off, but he's still out there, probably trying to decide whether to cut his losses or make one last attempt to get you himself. He won't give up," Mara said with certainty. "Not when he believes I know where his family's gold is hidden. He spent too many years nursing this grudge, invested too much in finding me." She looked down at Hope, who had quieted, and was looking up at her with those wise infant eyes. "We need to end this one way or another. What are you thinking?" Aston asked, though she suspected he already knew. The same desperate calculation was probably running through his mind. Sometimes the only way out of a trap was to spring it yourself on your own terms. "I'm thinking it's time I faced Josiah Hawkins." Mara said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Time I stopped running and started fighting back." She handed Hope to Aston, ignoring his protests. "Keep her safe. Whatever happens to me, promise me you'll get her out of here alive." "Mara, no," Aston said urgently. "You can't trust him. The moment you show yourself, he'll—" But she was already moving toward the cave entrance, driven by a maternal fury that burned brighter than her fear. Mara emerged from the smoke-filled cave to find Josiah Hawkins standing alone in the canyon, his face blackened with soot and his eyes wild with frustrated rage. He was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders with graying hair and the kind of cruel mouth that suggested he'd found pleasure in others' pain for most of his life. When he saw her, his expression shifted from rage to triumph. "There she is," he said, raising his rifle to cover her. "The daughter of the thieving bitch who killed my brother and destroyed my family." His voice was hoarse from breathing smoke, but the venom in it was undiluted. "Where is it, Mara? Where's the rest of the gold your mother stole from us?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Mara said, though, even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were a lie. The memories were coming back now, triggered by stress and the sound of Hawkins's accusations. Her mother counting coins late at night when she thought Mara was asleep. Her father's bitter comments about blood money and cursed gold. The way Catherine had always flinched when anyone mentioned mining accidents. "Now don't lie to me," Hawkins snarled, taking a step closer. "Your husband confirmed it before he died. Said Catherine had maps documents, something that showed where she'd hidden the rest of the ore she stole from our mine. Marcus was supposed to get that information from you, but the fool got greedy and tried to sell you instead of interrogating you properly. Marcus is dead." Mara asked, genuinely shocked despite everything. She'd assumed her worthless husband was still alive, somewhere probably gambling away whatever money Hawkins had paid him for her. The news hit her harder than she'd expected, not grief exactly, but a complex mix of emotions she couldn't quite sort through. "Killed him myself when I realized what he'd done," Hawkins said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Bullet to the head in some Denver alley. Nobody cared the man had no friends left after all his debts and betrayals." His smile was cold and predatory. Just like nobody will care when you disappear except as another cautionary tale about women who don't know their place. Rage flared in Mara's chest, burning away the last of her fear. My place? She repeated, her voice rising. My place is wherever I choose to stand, with whomever I choose to stand with. I'm not my mother, and I'm not responsible for whatever happened 20 years ago between your family and hers. She took a step forward, meeting his gaze without flinching. And I'm certainly not your property to buy, sell, or dispose of as you see fit. My brave words from a woman with no options. Hawkins said, but there was something in his expression that suggested her defiance had caught him off guard. He'd obviously expected her to cower and beg to offer him anything he wanted in exchange for her life. But here's the thing about being property, sweetheart. It doesn't matter what you think or want. It only matters what your owner decides to do with you. Then you're going to be disappointed, Mara said, reaching slowly for the knife Aston had given her. Because I belong to myself, and I've decided that you're not taking me anywhere. The blade felt solid and reassuring in her hand, though she had no illusions about her chances against an armed man twice her size. Hawkins laughed, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the canyon walls. You think that little knife is going to save you, girl? I've killed men twice your size with my bare hands. You're nothing but a scared little rabbit trying to convince herself she's a wolf. He raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel at her chest. Last chance. Tell me where the gold is hidden, and I'll make your death quick. Keep playing games, and I'll make sure you live long enough to watch me sell your baby to the kind of men who pay extra for children. The threat against hope shattered the last of Mara's restraint. With a wordless cry of fury, she lunged forward, the knife slashing toward Hawkins's throat. He jerked back the blade, missing him by inches, and brought the rifle butt down toward her head. She twisted away, feeling the stock whistle past her ear, and drove her knee toward his groin with all the strength she could muster. Hawkins doubled over with a grunt of pain, and Mara pressed her advantage, raking the knife across his forearm as he tried to bring the rifle to bear again. Blood welled from the shallow cut, and he cursed viciously as he backhanded her across the face. The blow sent her sprawling stars exploding across her vision. But she held onto the knife and rolled away as his boot stomped down where her head had been. "My, you little bitch," he roared, blood streaming from his arm. "I was going to make this easy, but now you're going to suffer. I'm going to break every bone in your body before I let you die." He raised the rifle again, but before he could fire, Aston's voice rang out from behind him. "Hawkins." The single word cracked like a whip across the canyon, and the big man spun around to find himself facing the barrel of Aston's rifle. "Step away from her. This ends now." There was something implacable in the Navajo man's voice, a finality that suggested negotiation was no longer an option. "Well, well," Hawkins said, though he kept his rifle trained on Mara rather than turning it toward Aston. "The noble savage comes to rescue his white woman. How touching." His smile was ugly and full of malice. "Tell me, Blackhorse, is she worth dying for? Because that's what's going to happen if you don't put that rifle down and walk away." "I've been dead inside for 4 years," Aston replied calmly. "Ever since I failed to save my sister from men like you. If I die today protecting Mara and her child, at least I'll die with honor restored." His finger was steady on the trigger, and Mara could see the absolute resolve in his dark eyes. "Honor." Hawkins laughed. "From a man whose own people cast him out like garbage, you're nothing, Blackhorse. A half-breed exile with delusions of heroism. At least when you're dead, you'll finally be useful as a warning to other Indians about what happens when they interfere with white men's business." The standoff stretched on neither man, willing to give ground, both rifles aimed and ready. Mara realized with growing horror that unless something changed, both men would probably end up dead, and then she and Hope would be left defenseless in the wilderness. There had to be another way, a solution that didn't require anyone's death, except possibly the man who'd caused all this suffering. That's when she remembered the coal oil Hawkins had used to create the smoke. Several containers of it were scattered around the canyon floor, and the wind was blowing toward where Hawkins stood. If she could create a distraction, get him to look away from Aston for just a moment. Moving as quietly as she could, Mara crawled toward the nearest oil container. Her ribs ached from Hawkins' blow, and she could taste blood in her mouth, but desperation gave her strength. If this worked, it would give Aston the opening he needed. If it failed, well, they were probably all going to die anyway. She reached the container and pulled out the cork with trembling fingers, then began pouring the oil in a line toward Hawkins's position. The smell was strong and acrid, but with all the smoke still hanging in the air, she hoped he wouldn't notice until it was too late. When she'd emptied the container, she pulled out the flint and steel Aston had given her and struck a spark. The oil caught with a whoosh of flame that raced across the canyon floor like a living thing. Hawkins spun toward the sound, his attention split between the fire and Aston's rifle. And in that moment of distraction, Aston fired. The bullet took Hawkins in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle flying across the stone. But Hawkins wasn't finished. Wounded and bleeding, he pulled a pistol from his belt and aimed it not at Aston, but at Mara. "If I can't have the gold," he snarled through gritted teeth, "then nobody can. You all die here." His finger tightened on the trigger. The shot never came. The flames from the burning oil had reached another container of coal oil, and the explosion knocked all three of them flat. Rocks tumbled from the canyon walls, and for a moment the air was full of fire and smoke, and the sound of the mountain itself groaning in protest. When the smoke cleared, Hawkins was trapped beneath a fallen boulder, his legs pinned and his pistol lying well out of reach. He was still alive, but clearly not going anywhere. Blood leaked from multiple cuts on his face and hands, and his breathing was labored and painful. "Help me," he gasped, looking up at Mara and Aston with desperate eyes. "I can't feel my legs. I think my back is broken." The arrogance and cruelty were gone, now replaced by the simple animal fear of a man facing his own mortality. Mara stood over him, the knife still in her hand, and felt nothing. No satisfaction at his suffering, no desire for revenge, just a vast emptiness where her hatred had been. "Where are the documents?" she asked quietly. "The ones you think prove where my mother hid your gold." "Saddlebags," Hawkins wheezed, gesturing weakly toward his horse. "Everything Marcus found. Maps, letters, bank records. It's all there." He coughed, blood speckling his lips. "For all the good it'll do you now. Even if you find the gold, you'll never be safe. There are others who know about it, others who'll come looking." Aston retrieved the saddlebags and brought them to Mara, who opened them with shaking hands. Inside, she found exactly what Hawkins had described, a collection of documents that painted a picture of her mother's secret life before marriage. Bank records showing large deposits of gold dust maps of mine claims in the Sangre de Cristo range, and letters from business partners discussing the rich ore they'd extracted. "It's all here," she said wonderingly. "Everything about the mine, the gold, even." She pulled out a letter in her mother's familiar handwriting, addressed to her but never sent. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it and began to read aloud. "My dearest Mara," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the truth I've hidden for so long has finally come to light. I pray you will understand and forgive the deception, though I know it will be hard. The mine collapse was not an accident. It was sabotage ordered by competitors who wanted to drive us out of business. When I learned the truth, I was faced with a choice: stay and fight men who had already proven they would kill for gold, or disappear with what wealth I could carry and hope to build a new life somewhere safe. Mara's voice broke as she continued reading. I chose to run to become Catherine Hayes instead of Catherine Montgomery to marry your father, and try to forget the blood that paid for our comfortable life. But I always intended to return the stolen gold to the families who deserved it, to make amends for the men who died because of my cowardice. The location of the main cache is marked on the map in this packet, coordinates that will lead you to justice if you have the courage I lacked. The letter went on to detail how Catherine had discovered the sabotage, the names of the men responsible, and her plans to expose them once she'd gathered enough evidence. But illness had taken her before she could act, leaving behind only guilt and hidden wealth that had shaped Mara's life in ways she'd never understood. She was going to give it back. Mara said, looking down at Hawkins with new understanding. My mother wasn't a thief. She was scared and alone, and she took what she thought she needed to survive. But she was going to make it right. Tears streamed down her cheeks as 20 years of carefully constructed hatred crumbled in the face of truth. Hawkins stared up at her with fading eyes. Doesn't matter now, he whispered. She's dead, I'm dying, and the gold was never worth what it cost. His voice was growing weaker, blood loss and internal injuries taking their toll. My brother, he wasn't even supposed to be in the mine that day. Took another man's shift because he needed the extra money for his new baby. Understanding washed over Mara like a cold wave. That's why you're so obsessed with this. It's not just about the money. You blame my mother for your brother's death. You've spent 20 years hunting her memory, and when you couldn't find her, you settled for hunting me instead. She knelt beside him, no longer afraid. I'm sorry about your brother. I'm sorry about all of it. But hurting me won't bring him back. I know, Hawkins said, his voice barely audible now. I've known that for years, but I couldn't let it go. The anger was all I had left after everything else was gone. My wife, my children, my business, all sacrificed on the altar of revenge. He looked up at her with eyes that held a lifetime of regret. Don't make my mistake, girl. Don't let hatred poison what time you have left. And with those words, Josiah Hawkins closed his eyes and died. They buried Hawkins in the sacred canyon, using rocks from the explosion to build a simple cairn. It seemed wrong somehow to leave his body for scavengers, despite everything he'd done. Aston spoke a prayer in Navajo over the grave, asking the spirits to grant peace to a troubled soul, while Mara stood holding hope and thinking about the circular nature of violence and revenge. What now? Aston asked as they prepared to leave the canyon. Hope was sleeping peacefully in a carrier he'd fashioned from deer hide and willow branches, oblivious to the dramatic events that had secured her freedom. The gold your mother left, it's enough to buy safety to start over anywhere you choose. Mara looked at the maps and documents one more time, then walked to the sacred spring where Ayanna had died 4 years earlier. Without hesitation, she tossed the entire packet into the water, watching as the papers separated and dissolved in the current. My mother was right, she said simply. Blood money only brings more blood. The gold can stay hidden, maybe forever. You're giving up a fortune, Aston said, though his tone suggested approval rather than disbelief. That gold could have bought you anything, a house, education, for hope, protection from men like Hawkins, who might come looking for you in the future. Money didn't protect my mother from guilt, and it didn't save Hawkins from his obsession. Mara replied, What protects us is choosing who we want to be, not letting our past define our future. She turned to face him, decision clear in her eyes. I want to be a mother, a teacher, maybe even a wife, if I'm lucky enough to find the right man. I want Hope to grow up free, knowing that her worth isn't measured in gold or determined by other people's greed. Aston's expression softened at her words. And what about the name? He asked quietly. Mara Bellamy doesn't exist anymore. Marcus is dead. your marriage was never legal since you were sold like property. You can be anyone you choose to be now. Mara considered this as they walked toward the canyon entrance, where Hawkins' horse waited patiently for riders who would never return. The animal would serve them well on the journey ahead, whatever destination they ultimately chose. "Mara Blackhorse," she said, finally testing the sound of it. "If you'll have us, that is. Hope and I could use a good man in our lives, someone who understands that family isn't about blood, but about choice. Are you proposing to me?" Aston asked, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, at the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since their ordeal began. "Because if you are, you should know that Navajo marriage customs require—" "I'm proposing that we build something together." Mara interrupted, her own smile matching his. "A family, a life, maybe even a school where children like Hope can learn that they're free to become anything they choose. The rest we can figure out as we go." She reached for his hand, feeling the calluses and scars that told the story of his survival. "What do you say, Aston Blackhorse, ready for a new adventure?" His answer was to lean down and kiss her gently, carefully, as if she were made of something precious and fragile. When they broke apart, Hope was awake and looking up at them with those impossibly wise infant eyes, as if she understood that her world had just become infinitely larger and safer. "Well, where do we go?" Aston asked as they mounted the horse, Mara settling into the saddle with Hope while he took the reins. "California, where no one knows our history. Canada, where American laws can't touch us. Or somewhere closer where we can help other women escape the kind of life Hawkins forced on you." Mara looked back one last time at Medicine Wheel Canyon, where ancient spirits had witnessed the birth of her daughter and the death of her persecutor. Somewhere in those sacred stones, the gold that had caused so much suffering would remain hidden, perhaps forever. Let future generations find it or leave it buried, either way, it would no longer be stained with blood and revenge. "West," she said simply. "Toward the sunset, toward whatever future we can build with our own hands and hearts." She adjusted Hope in her arms, feeling the solid weight of new life and infinite possibility. "And maybe someday we'll come back here. Show Hope where she was born, teach her about the spirits who protected us and the importance of choosing love over hatred." As they rode out of the canyon and into the vast Colorado wilderness, Mara felt a peace she'd never known before. Behind them lay death and violence and the bitter legacy of old grievances. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and all the challenges of building a life from nothing. But between her arms was Hope, literally and figuratively. And beside her rode a man who understood that true strength came not from violence, but from the courage to choose mercy when revenge would be easier. The winter wind that had nearly killed her weeks earlier now felt like a benediction, carrying away the last remnants of her old life, as Mara Bellamy, the preacher's daughter, the unwilling wife, the bought woman, whose worth was measured in silver coins. In its place rode Mara Blackhorse, mother and survivor, ready to face whatever challenges the frontier might offer to a woman brave enough to claim her own destiny. And in her arms, Hope Ayana slept peacefully secure in the knowledge that she was loved, protected, and free. The first generation of a family built not on blood or obligation, but on the simple revolutionary idea that people could choose to care for each other in a world that often seemed determined to tear them apart. The future stretched before them like an unwritten page full of possibility and promise. Whatever words would eventually fill that page, Mara knew they would be written. In hope, not fear, in love, not hatred, and in the unshakable belief that even in the harshest wilderness, human kindness could bloom and flourish and create something beautiful from the ashes of old pain. As the sun set behind the distant peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, 3 riders, a woman, a man, and a baby, disappeared into the vast American West, carrying with them the seeds of a new beginning and the hard-won knowledge that freedom was not something to be given or taken, but something to be claimed and defended with every breath, every choice, every act of love, in a world that often forgot to value such things. Their story would become legend in the years to come. The tale of a woman who chose mercy over revenge, a man who found redemption in protecting the innocent, and a child born free in a land where freedom was still a dream for many. But that night, as they made camp under a canopy of stars that seemed to stretch to infinity, they were simply a family beginning their journey toward tomorrow, whatever that tomorrow might bring. In the end, the only chains that truly bind us are the ones we choose to wear.